Rain hammered the road like an argument that wouldn't end. Headlights flared, vanished, then came the sound, a scream of metal, the universe gasping. Gabriel Santos jerked the wheel, heart racing faster than the wipers. He had 6 minutes to reach his daughter. 6 minutes to prove to the court, to the sitter, to himself, that he could be enough. The wreck was a broken silhouette against the guardrail. Steam rose, white against black rain. He should have kept driving, but something in him refused. He braked, stepped into the downpour, and ran toward the crash. The car was crushed on the driver's side. Inside, a woman sat frozen, blood tracing the line of her hair. Her eyes flickered, dazed and lost. Gabriel cut the seatbelt with his pocket tool, voice steady even as his hands shook. He whispered her name after hearing it once, Isabella. It sounded fragile, as if the night might swallow it whole. Gasoline stung the air. He pushed the bent metal with his shoulder until pain painted stars across his vision. The dashboard gave way, and she slid free into his arms, breathing like someone trying to remember how. He laid her on the wet asphalt, his hoodie pressed around her trembling body. The rain did not care, but he did. Sirens were still distant. He spoke just to keep her awake, words tumbling between them about his daughter Sophia, about how she loved to draw robots with flower crowns. Isabella's eyes blinked slowly, holding onto the sound of his voice more than its meaning. When the paramedics finally arrived, they looked at him with a mix of surprise and respect. He had kept her alive long enough to matter. He stepped back as they worked, soaked to the bone, ready to leave. But then came the deep, thunderous rhythm of rotors slicing the rain. A helicopter descended onto the nearby field, light scattering like broken glass. Men in dark coats rushed out with umbrellas that didn't belong in this kind of weather. They moved with precision, as if the storm existed for them. One of them approached the paramedics and spoke quietly. The name slipped through the rain and reached Gabriel's ears. Isabella Vale, the daughter of Enrique Vale, a name powerful enough to bend cities. Gabriel blinked at the realization. The woman he'd pulled from the wreck was someone who had never known late rent, or cheap coffee, or waiting for buses that never came. The officer's voice cut through the storm, saying they would take over transport. The paramedics hesitated, but it wasn't really a question. Then, a hand pointed toward Gabriel. She asked for him. He froze. The helicopter lights reflected on the wet ground, his reflection fractured. He thought about Sophia waiting with her backpack, about the sitter's cold tone when he'd be late again. But the decision was already made. He climbed into the helicopter beside the unconscious woman he'd just met. The rotors swallowed the world. The city lights stretched below like veins of fire. Gabriel held onto the seat, watching the rain smear across the window. He whispered that he worked at Snow Raphael Hospital, just janitorial, just nights. The security man beside him said nothing, only gave him a look that hovered between curiosity and confusion. When they landed on the hospital roof, the wind hit like an accusation. Isabella was rushed into the trauma bay, white lights burning, voices layering orders. Gabriel stayed at the doorway, invisible but present. He recognized the doctors, the rhythm of the place where he mopped floors, and tried not to imagine the stories behind every red stain. Then the doors opened again, this time for a man whose presence changed the air. Silver hair, sharp eyes, and silence that commanded obedience. Enrique Vale. He went straight to the bed, touching his daughter's hand with the kind of love only power can afford to show in public. Gabriel stood still, soaked, unimportant. But when Henrique's gaze finally reached him, it lingered. There was confusion there, maybe gratitude, maybe disbelief that someone like Gabriel could be standing in the same room. And in that moment, between the hum of machines and the drip of rain from his sleeves, Gabriel felt it, the weight of a night that had rewritten the order of the world. The hospital smelled of metal, rain, and adrenaline. Gabriel stood in the corner, drenched and invisible, watching a world that wasn't built for people like him. Doctors moved with purpose, commands, numbers, the rhythm of saving lives. Machines beeped, monitors glowed, and the sound of rain on the glass roof merged with the chaos inside. He felt small among them, the janitor who accidentally became part of a miracle. But miracles were messy, and they always came with a price. Through the glass, he saw Dr. Elena Park lead the team, calm, sharp, unyielding. She spoke quickly, her voice slicing through noise. They were losing blood volume fast. The assistant called out a number that made the room colder. IB negative, the rarest. They had only 3 units in stock. The words cut through him like a quiet alarm. He'd cleaned enough trauma bays to know what that meant: minutes, not hours. Enrique Vale stood by the window, hands clasped, face carved from power and disbelief. The billionaire who could buy anything, except time. He kept his eyes on his daughter, but when he finally turned toward Gabriel, there was something different. Not gratitude, not yet. More like calculation mixed with confusion, as if trying to understand how a man who smelled of detergent and rain had carried his daughter through hell. Gabriel shifted under the weight of that gaze. His hoodie dripped onto the tile. The nurse at the counter glanced at him, then back at the screen, his presence tolerated only because chaos had bigger problems. The surgeon's voice rose. They were out of blood. Another nurse spoke, too quietly for anyone to hear unless they were listening for reasons they didn't fully understand. Gabriel was. He remembered his last hospital checkup, a donor drive 2 years ago, when he gave blood for a cafeteria voucher and forgot about it. The nurse had said something then, almost laughing. Rare type, huh, of negative, keep that on record. The memory slammed into him now. He took a step forward, then another. Test me, he said. His voice was too loud in a room that only wanted professional voices. The doctor turned, startled. Henrique's eyes narrowed. I'm of negative, Gabriel continued. Test me. I can donate. The nurse froze for a heartbeat, then signaled another to check the system. A few keystrokes later, the truth flashed on the screen. It was there, buried in old files from a routine donation. Gabriel Santos, of. Enrique blinked, disbelief cracking his mask. You'd do that? Gabriel didn't answer. He rolled up his sleeve. His veins stood out, ready. The same arms that carried mops, boxes, and now the weight of a woman he didn't know, arms that had no right to change the course of anyone's life but his own. They moved fast. The nurse led him down the hall, antiseptic and light everywhere. He sat on the chair, still shaking from the cold, watching the tube fill. Dark red, thick with life, flowing towards someone whose family probably had never noticed the janitor in the corner. He closed his eyes. He didn't pray, he just breathed. When it was done, they thanked him in a language of efficiency, nods, gentle words, forms to sign. But the moment his blood disappeared behind that swinging trauma room door, something else happened. The boundaries of their worlds blurred. Hours later, after surgery, the rain stopped. The storm had left the sky in pieces, gray and orange, the kind of dawn that looked like a promise trying to remember itself. Dr. Park came out with tired eyes. She made it, she said simply. Gabriel didn't realize he'd been holding his breath until his chest finally gave up. He nodded, unable to speak. She added quietly, your blood stabilized her. Without it, her sentence faded. He didn't need the rest. Enrique Vale stepped closer, his polished shoes making no sound on the tile. For a long second, he just looked at Gabriel, at the janitor with wet hair and sleepless eyes who had saved the person his wealth couldn't. Then, for the first time that night, Henrique's voice softened. Come with me. Gabriel hesitated. The world of polished floors and tailored suits was not his. But the tone in that voice wasn't one he could ignore. They walked down the corridor together, one man with everything, one with nothing but decency. The air between them felt fragile, like glass warmed by lightning. And somewhere behind the double doors, a young woman named Isabella Vale slept beneath the steady hum of machines, carrying the blood of the man who had once mopped her father's floors. Morning came slow, dragging the weight of the night behind it. The rain had stopped, but the city still glistened as if reluctant to move on. In the hospital corridor, the scent of disinfectant mixed with cold coffee and quiet exhaustion. Gabriel sat by the vending machine, staring at the cup of tea that had already gone cold. His hoodie clung to him, still damp. He had called the sitter before sunrise. Sophia was fine, asleep, unaware that her father's blood now flowed through someone whose family could buy airplanes but not peace. The elevator chimed. From it stepped Enrique Vale, dressed in the kind of calm that money buys, clean suit, no visible fatigue, no sign that he had spent the night by his daughter's bedside. His gaze found Gabriel, and the corridor seemed to straighten itself. Walk with me, he said. Not a question. They moved past rooms full of sleeping patients, IVs dripping like clocks. Henrique's silence was heavy, not hostile, just too precise, as if every word had to be justified before being spoken. When they reached the glass wall that overlooked the helipad, he finally stopped. The helicopter was still there, silent now, gleaming in the morning light. "You saved my daughter's life," Enrique began. His tone was factual, not emotional. "I was told you work here, night janitorial staff." Gabriel nodded. "Yes, sir." Snow Raphael. Enrique turned to face him, the city's skyline mirrored in his eyes. "Do you understand what that means, what you did?" Gabriel hesitated. "I did what anyone would have done." Enrique almost smiled. Almost. No. Most people would have driven past. He paused, searching the man's face. "Your name will be in every report. My team already sent word to the board. You'll be compensated. Generously." Gabriel frowned slightly, unsure what that even meant. Money, promotion, headlines. None of it seemed real. "That's not necessary," he said, voice quiet. Enrique looked at him differently then, as if the simplicity itself was a puzzle. "You gave your blood, Mr. Santos. I don't let debts stay unpaid." Gabriel shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." Enrique's jaw tightened, not from anger, but disbelief. He was a man who'd built his life on transactions, on understanding what everything costs. Gratitude without a price tag didn't fit his language. They stood there for a long moment. Through the window, the city stirred awake, ambulances returning, nurses trading shifts, the sky softening into pale gold. Finally, Enrique spoke again, slower now. "When she wakes, she asks about the man who pulled her from the wreck. I'll make sure she meets you, but I need to be clear, people will talk. They'll call this a story, turn it into something to consume. Are you ready for that?" Gabriel let out a small, uncertain laugh. "I clean floors for a living. People don't usually notice me enough to talk." Enrique studied him, then nodded once. "You may find that changes soon." Before Gabriel could answer, the nurse from the trauma team appeared at the end of the hall. Her expression was lighter. "She's awake," she said. Both men turned. For Enrique, it was relief. For Gabriel, disbelief that his part in this wasn't over yet. They entered the recovery room quietly. Isabella lay beneath warm light, pale but breathing steady. Her eyes fluttered open when she heard footsteps. For a moment, confusion clouded her gaze, until memory snapped back, the rain, the crash, the man's voice telling her to hold on. She looked at Gabriel first. "You," she whispered. Her voice was soft, roughened by oxygen and pain, but sure. He smiled faintly, awkward and sincere. "You made it." She tried to sit up, but the nurse motioned for her to stay still. "They told me. You pulled me out," she murmured. "And that you gave blood." Gabriel shrugged, embarrassed. "It was just timing. You needed it, and I had it." Her eyes softened, tears threatening but not falling. "You saved my life." Enrique stood quietly at the edge, watching the exchange with a kind of reverence he didn't show often. The simplicity of their words carried something money couldn't replicate, gratitude that felt human, unpolished, unplanned. For the first time in years, Enrique didn't have anything to add. Isabella reached out, her hand trembling slightly. Gabriel hesitated, then took it. Her skin was cold but alive. In that fragile silence, something shifted, not romance, not destiny, but a recognition. Two worlds, one collision. And somewhere deep inside the hospital, under the hum of fluorescent lights, fate waited, not done with them yet. The next few days passed like the quiet after a storm, everything still standing, but nothing quite the same. Gabriel returned to work as if nothing had happened. The smell of disinfectant, the soft squeak of the mop, the hum of machines, all familiar. But the nurses looked at him differently now. The whispers followed him through corridors. The janitor who saved the billionaire's daughter. He hated the attention. He didn't know what to do with it. He had never liked being seen. At night, after his shift, he went home to Sophia. She asked why his arm was bandaged. He told her a small version of the truth, that he helped someone who got hurt, and that being kind sometimes hurts too. She nodded with the serious wisdom only children have, then went back to coloring her robots. But outside their small apartment, the world was changing faster than he could keep up. One morning, when he arrived at the hospital, his supervisor was waiting with a strange expression. "Mr. Vale asked to see you," she said. "He's upstairs, private wing." Gabriel's stomach tightened. He went anyway. The elevator ride felt endless, like climbing out of his own life. When the doors opened, he stepped into a world of silence and polished marble. Security guards, white orchids, the kind of calm that came from money. Enrique Vale was there, reading a report, every gesture controlled. "Mr. Santos," he greeted without looking up, "you've been difficult to reach." Gabriel stood by the door, unsure whether to sit. "I've been working." Enrique set the paper down. "You shouldn't be. Not after what you did." He motioned toward a chair. "Sit." The tone left no room for refusal. "I wanted to thank you properly," Enrique continued, "but I also wanted to understand you. You had every reason to walk away that night, the child waiting for you, no obligation, no reward. Yet you didn't." Gabriel shrugged. "Someone needed help. I was there." "That's not an answer," Enrique said softly. "That's a reflex. Most people don't have it." Silence filled the room again. Rain brushed against the window, softer now, like memory. Enrique leaned back. "You may not realize this, but your name is already in the press. Someone leaked it. By tomorrow morning, every paper will be talking about the janitor who saved Isabella Vale. They'll want interviews, photos, your story." Gabriel's eyes widened. "No, I don't want that." Enrique nodded slowly. "Then let me help you control it. I can make sure you're protected, that your daughter isn't harassed, that your life doesn't turn into spectacle." Gabriel hesitated. "Why would you do that?" Enrique looked at him long enough for the truth to settle. "Because you saved the only thing that still matters to me." The words carried a weight he hadn't planned to reveal. Before Gabriel could respond, a soft voice came from the doorway. "You're both talking like I'm not here." Isabella stood there, fragile but awake, walking slowly with the nurse beside her. Her face was pale, her movements careful, but her eyes were alive. Enrique rose immediately, the strict father turning human again. "You shouldn't be walking yet." "I'm fine," she said, then looked past him to Gabriel. "I needed to see him." Gabriel stood, awkward and unsure, as she approached. "You don't have to." "I do," she interrupted gently. "I've been trying to remember what happened that night. I remember the rain, the sound of metal, and your voice." Her eyes glistened. "You kept talking, telling me to breathe. You gave me something to hold on to." Gabriel's throat tightened. Anyone would have done the same. She shook her head. "No, they wouldn't." Enrique watched quietly, his face unreadable. For once, power had nothing to offer here. Then Isabella did something unexpected. She reached into the small bag the nurse carried and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "My father doesn't know this yet," she said, glancing at Enrique, "but I want you to have it." She handed it to Gabriel. Inside was a handwritten note and a business card. "I'm part of the Vale Foundation," she said. "We run community projects, education, healthcare, training programs. I want you to join us, not as charity, as someone who understands what people like you face every day." Gabriel looked at the card, then at her. "I clean floors, Miss Vale." "You saved lives," she replied softly. "That's not so different." Enrique said nothing. The faintest hint of pride crossed his face, but it was tangled with something else, a realization that his daughter was now speaking a language he didn't fully own anymore. Gabriel didn't answer. The paper in his hand felt heavier than it should. Outside, sunlight finally broke through the clouds, spilling into the room. For the first time in years, the world looked almost kind. The sun had risen over Snow Raphael, turning the glass towers gold. From the hospital roof, the world below seemed quiet, almost forgiving. Gabriel stood there alone, staring at the helipad where it all began, the night of rain, the crash, the chaos that somehow brought him here. He hadn't gone home yet. Sleep felt useless. The last few hours had been a blur of reporters waiting outside, hospital staff whispering his name, and a dozen calls he didn't answer. The city wanted a hero, but Gabriel didn't feel like one. He just wanted to pick up his daughter from school, walk home, and pretend life could still be simple. Behind him, the elevator doors opened. He didn't have to turn to know who it was. "I thought I'd find you here," Isabella said softly. Her voice was steadier now, though still touched by fragility. She wore a long beige coat over her hospital gown, hair tied loosely, eyes marked by the kind of tiredness that changes people forever. Gabriel managed a small smile. "You should be resting." "I've had enough rest to last a lifetime," she replied, walking slowly to stand beside him. The morning wind lifted her hair. For a while, they both just looked at the skyline. When she finally spoke again, her tone was quieter. You know, I used to fly up here by helicopter all the time. Fundraisers, events, board meetings. But last night was the first time I ever landed here scared. It was the first time I realized what it feels like to need someone. Gabriel looked at her, unsure how to respond. The city shimmered behind her like a reflection of something unreal. I don't think I saved you, he said after a moment. I just happened to be there. Isabella smiled faintly. Maybe that's what saving someone really is, just being there when no one else is. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy, but warm, like the calm that comes after the heart finally accepts what it's been through. From below, the sounds of the city began to rise, horns, vendors, a siren far away. Ordinary life returning, unbothered by who had almost died and who had almost lost everything. Isabella turned to him. I meant what I said yesterday. About the foundation, I want you to join us. You have a way of seeing people that money can't teach. Gabriel hesitated. I don't belong in your world. Neither do I anymore, she said quietly. Maybe that's why I trust you. Her words lingered between them. The truth of it was simple. They were both survivors of different storms, both trying to rebuild something invisible. Then, from behind, the deep hum of rotors began again. The helicopter was returning, blades cutting through sunlight this time instead of rain. Enrique Vale stepped out as it landed, his expression softened, his usual armor of certainty slightly cracked. He approached them, looking at his daughter first, then at Gabriel. I spoke to the board this morning, he said. The foundation will open a new program, one focused on emergency response and social outreach. I'd like you, Mr. Santos, to help shape it. Gabriel blinked. I don't have the education for that. Enrique shook his head. Education can be earned. But courage, that's harder to find. The helicopter's noise filled the air again, but it no longer felt threatening. For the first time, Gabriel didn't feel small standing next to the man whose name filled newspapers. He felt equal, not by status, but by something more ancient, humanity. Isabella looked at both men, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. Seems like we're all getting second chances. Gabriel glanced up at the sky, still streaked with clouds, still imperfect, and nodded. Maybe the world isn't as divided as it looks from down there. The moment hung between them, suspended like the mist above the city. The storm had passed, but its echo would stay with them all, in the blood they shared, in the lives that crossed for reasons no one could explain, and in the silent promise that sometimes, even in a world built on power, kindness still had the final word. As the helicopter lifted off again, sunlight broke through the last cloud. It fell across their faces, three people who had entered the night as strangers and walked out of it carrying pieces of each other. And down below, life went on, but something in the city's pulse had changed, just a little, because one man had stopped his car in the rain. 2 days later, a car he didn't recognize stopped outside his apartment building. A driver stepped out, holding an envelope. From Mr. Vale, he said. Still, the weight of it pressed on him. What if I fail? By the time he finished, the room was quiet. No flash, no applause, just silence thick with something honest. Henrique's voice softened. No, I want to give it meaning. Inside was a simple card. Come to the foundation. It's time. In the staff locker room, a folded newspaper sat on the bench with his name on it. Hero from the lower floors. Underneath the photo, a small paragraph told a story that didn't feel like his, cleaned up, romanticized, missing all the fear, the cold, the helplessness. By the time he reached his daughter's school that afternoon, parents were already talking. One mother waved too enthusiastically, another asked if he'd be on television. Sophia didn't understand why her father suddenly mattered to strangers. She just wanted him home again. That night, the phone rang nonstop. Reporters, TV producers, people offering sponsorships. One said, "We can make this viral. Your life will change." Gabriel hung up. But it was too late. His number was already out there. When Gabriel arrived, the Vale Foundation towered over the city. Glass, chrome, perfection. The same building he used to mop at night when it was empty, now full of cameras and light. He felt like an intruder in his own story. The news broke before sunrise. The janitor who saved the heiress, The headline ran across every screen, every radio, every cafe TV in the city. Photos of him leaving the hospital, tired, wet, confused, were everywhere. Someone had caught the moment he looked back at the helipad, and now that single frame had turned into a story people wanted to feel good about. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't read the paper they'd prepared. He just told the truth. Outside, the cameras waited, hungry for more, but Gabriel didn't stay. He slipped out a side door, breathing in the morning air. Inside, Enrique and Isabella were waiting. She smiled, the kind of smile that still carried scars. He looked calmer, stronger. Enrique spoke first. I told you we'd have to control the story. The press doesn't wait for truth. They invent what sells, so we'll give them our version. A partnership, a project, a purpose. Gabriel frowned. You want to use this? But Gabriel didn't feel good. Isabella stepped closer. We're launching a campaign for first aid training in low-income communities. You'll lead it. You'll tell people what to do when help is far away. That's what saved me. Not luck, not money, but someone who acted. Gabriel hesitated. I'm not a speaker. I don't know how to be that person. You already were, she said. That night, he looked at her, and for a brief moment, saw not the billionaire's daughter, but someone trying to rebuild her own courage piece by piece. Maybe they weren't so different. By the next morning, Gabriel's world was no longer his own. Henrique's tone was firm, almost fatherly. Then you fail trying to do something worth it. That's more than most people ever do. Still, he didn't know what waited ahead. Fame had a way of turning miracles into burdens. The next morning, cameras filled the foundation auditorium. Journalists, lights, microphones, all of it made Gabriel's stomach twist. He wore a borrowed blazer that didn't quite fit and looked at Isabella for reassurance. She nodded once. When he walked through the hospital entrance for his shift that night, people stopped to look. Some smiled, others whispered. Security guards nodded like he was a celebrity they didn't quite understand. The same supervisors who once ignored him now wanted to shake his hand. He spoke of fear, of not knowing what to do but doing it anyway. Of ordinary people who fixed the world one small act at a time. Of his daughter, who thought kindness was just another form of strength. He didn't know where to put his eyes. For the first time since the crash, the noise didn't scare him. It only reminded him of how far a single decision in the rain could echo. And somewhere, behind the foundation walls, a story much bigger than his was still being written, one that would test everything he believed about loyalty, gratitude, and what people do when the world finally looks their way. Weeks passed, and the story refused to fade. Gabriel's face had become a symbol, the everyman hero, as the headlines called him. His photo was printed on hospital walls, on foundation posters, on social media posts captioned "Faith in Humanity Restored," but the attention soon became heavier than the gratitude. With fame came intrusion. Some journalists began digging into his life, and what they found wasn't the version they wanted to tell. They unearthed debts, unpaid rent, the custody hearing over Sofia. The same press that had once called him a savior now labeled him the hero with a past. The tone changed, and with it, the way people looked at him. Gabriel felt it everywhere, in the silence that followed when he entered a room, in the glances between coworkers, in the way kindness turned into curiosity. He stopped answering calls, avoided the cafeteria, left through the back door after every shift. What had once been admiration now felt like surveillance. He wasn't a person anymore, just a headline walking around. Every act of decency came with suspicion, every silence, with judgment. The fame that had arrived overnight now felt like a punishment. One night, in the small hospital break room, Isabella found him sitting alone with the lights off, his phone face down on the table. She could see how exhausted he was, not just from work, but from carrying the weight of a story he never asked for. You can't disappear, she said softly, leaning on the doorframe. I didn't ask for any of this, Gabriel murmured. His voice was low, almost flat. They're digging into my life like I'm on trial. They want a perfect hero. I'm not that. No one is, Isabella replied, stepping closer. But maybe that's the point. He looked up at her, his eyes dark with fatigue. They even called my daughter's school. She came home crying because kids told her I only saved you for money. Her jaw clenched. Then let's show them the truth. Gabriel gave a bitter laugh. How? They control the story now. Not if we tell it ourselves, she said simply. There was no hesitation in her tone, only resolve. The next morning, she went to her father's office, carrying that same determination. Enrique Vale sat behind his massive desk, calm as always, his fingers gliding over reports as though nothing beyond those pages could touch him. When she spoke, he didn't look up at first, but her words were sharper than any document in his hands. "They're turning Gabriel into a headline," she said. "We can stop it." Enrique sighed and removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "We can't stop a storm by shouting at the rain. The media cycle will pass." "It won't," she insisted, "unless we give them something else to talk about, something real." He finally met her gaze, brow furrowed. "What are you suggesting?" "Transparency," she said. "Let him speak. Let him show who he is, a father, not a brand, not a rumor. The truth will outlive the noise." Enrique studied her for a moment that stretched long enough to feel like doubt. Then, quietly, he said, "You care about him." "I owe him my life," she replied, her voice steady. "I won't let the world tear him apart for saving it." 2 days later, they called a small press conference. No grand stage, no cameras flashing in anticipation, just one room, one microphone, and one man who'd rather be anywhere else. Gabriel stood before them, a little nervous, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the microphone. Instead of reading the speech the foundation had written for him, he spoke from the heart. He talked about fear, the kind that paralyzes and the kind that pushes you forward. He talked about exhaustion, about the nights spent working to keep a roof over his daughter's head. He told them that being brave wasn't about not being afraid, but about acting in spite of it. He said that he didn't save Isabella to be called a hero. He saved her because she was a person, and in that rain, that was enough. When he mentioned Sofia, his voice cracked, and for the first time, the cameras went still. There were no sound bites to capture what honesty feels like. When it was over, no one clapped. The silence that filled the room wasn't empty, it was full of something heavy and human. Slowly, people began lowering their phones. Someone whispered, "That's what truth sounds like." Afterward, Enrique approached him in private. The office felt smaller that night, the city lights outside softened by mist. "You handled that better than most politicians," he said. Gabriel smiled faintly. "I wasn't trying to handle anything. I just told the truth." Enrique nodded, studying him as though trying to understand a language he didn't speak. "That's rarer than you think." He paused, then added, "There's a position opening soon, community relations. It's yours if you'll take it." Gabriel blinked, unsure if he had heard right. "You want me to work for the foundation?" "You already do, in a way," Enrique said, his tone softer than usual. "People listen to you. They believe you. Use that for something that matters." For a long moment, Gabriel said nothing. The idea terrified him, the pressure, the exposure, the possibility of failing in front of everyone who had already judged him once. But then he thought of Sofia, of the chance to give her a better life, to turn the noise of his story into something useful. He extended his hand, hesitant but firm. "All right," he said quietly, "I'll try." Enrique took his hand, and for the first time, it wasn't the handshake of two different worlds, just two fathers who had almost lost everything. That night, Gabriel stepped out into the parking lot, the city breathing around him. The wind carried the faint hum of traffic and the distant echo of sirens. He looked up at the dim stars, blurred by light and clouds, and realized how far he'd come from that stormy road. He wasn't a man running from his past anymore. He wasn't a hero either. He was simply someone trying to move forward, one act of courage at a time. The world had tested him, twisted his story, and tried to own his name, but it hadn't broken him. And though he didn't yet know it, one final decision still waited ahead, the kind that wouldn't just change his life, but the lives of everyone who had ever doubted what an ordinary man could do when the world stopped watching. The months that followed felt quieter, but not easier. The media storm had passed, leaving behind its usual wreckage, curiosity that burned too bright and died too fast. Gabriel's face no longer filled news feeds, but sometimes strangers still recognized him on the bus, offering a nod or a quiet thank you. He never knew what to say back. Gratitude was heavier than fame. At the hospital, his work changed. He no longer cleaned floors at night. Now he trained others, led workshops, and worked alongside the foundation team in projects that took him far beyond those walls. He visited schools, community centers, small towns where people had never been taught what to do in an emergency. He spoke not like a hero, but like a neighbor. Every time he told the story, he left out his own name. He wanted people to remember the act, not the man. Sophia loved coming to the foundation building after school. She'd sit in Isabella's office drawing while they worked, filling the desk with little sketches of helicopters, hospitals, and people holding hands under rain. Sometimes, she'd point to one of her drawings and say, "That's the night everything changed," and it had. Enrique watched all of it unfold from a distance. The project they'd started together, a national campaign for emergency preparedness and medical access, grew faster than anyone predicted. For once, the Vale name wasn't attached to wealth or scandal, but to something that mattered. Yet, in quiet moments, he knew it wasn't his doing. It was Gabriel's honesty that people believed in, not his money. One evening, the three of them stood on the same rooftop where the helicopter had landed that stormy night. The air was calm now, the city lights steady instead of frantic. Below, Snow Raphael glowed like a living map, roads pulsing with movement, buildings reflecting the last light of dusk. "It feels smaller from up here," Gabriel said quietly, resting his hands on the railing. Enrique nodded. "Perspective does that. From the ground, the world looks endless. From above, you see how close everything really is." Isabella smiled faintly, even the people who think they're worlds apart. For a long time, none of them spoke. The sound of the wind was enough. They didn't need to name what they all knew, that their lives would always be tied to that single night, to that rain, to the blood that had crossed invisible lines. When they finally turned to leave, Isabella paused. "You know, I used to think that night ruined me," she said softly. "Now I think it fixed something I didn't know was broken." Gabriel looked at her, not as a savior or a symbol, but as someone who had walked through the same darkness and come out changed. "Sometimes," he said, "the worst night of your life just shows you who you really are." Enrique gave a small smile, rare and sincere, "and who you can still become." As they walked toward the elevator, the helicopter lights blinked red behind them, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat that had finally found its pace. Later that night, Gabriel sat on his apartment balcony, Sophia asleep inside. The city stretched out beneath him, alive and restless. He thought about the thousands of people who would never know his name, the ones who would learn CPR from a volunteer he had trained, the ones who might one day stop on a rainy road because they remembered hearing his story. That was enough. He took a long breath and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, there was no fear waiting behind it. Only quiet. Only light. Down below, in the pulse of the city, the world kept moving, unaware that it had already been changed by one ordinary man who refused to keep driving. And above it all, the sky, once torn open by a storm, stood clear, endless, and forgiving.